Greetings and welcome to the Pure Report. I'm your host, Rob Ludeman. It is time to bring the orange, and we did it, Chad. I got Chad Monteith in studio so we can talk about the Everpure, and I have to look down because we just changed the name.
We did.
Everpure Resilience Service, formerly Pure Protect, formerly Everpure Protect, but we're going to be digging into cyber resilience in kind of an interesting angle. Hey, thanks for making the time. Glad to get you out here finally in studio. How long's it been now that you've been here? A couple years?
About
a
little
right?
bit more. It's about 8 years.
Oh my gosh.
Came over in 2018, if you can believe it.
StorReduce acquisition.
The StorReduce acquisition.
That's right. It precedes this. You kind of navigated through.
It is. Well, it was even, a little bit of the genesis of a lot of what we're doing here with what's really started as something that we called modern data protection.
Yeah.
We came in, we'd built with StorReduce. I've actually done a number of startups, had a lot of fun being a builder with them. The StorReduce one, we'd built this object storage virtualization layer. It added some features that object storage didn't have.
Yeah.
Deduplication, replication, things like that. And we'd caught causes eye early, and we came over to build what became Object Engine on top of FlashBlade, which was an exciting time. And that really built the modern data protection story. And, as with all things that we've got in tech, there's not so much things that are truly like light bulb type of things. A lot of it's innovative. It's incremental type of technologies. And back in 2018, modern data protection was, an application of the Flash technology that we built, that we realized, hey, we can do something much more performant than what anybody else had done, especially on the restore side. And we've seen probably 100x growth in that business since we started there. But over time, you increment on that. And now we've realized, with Everpure Resilience Service, that there's a lot more that we can be doing for our customers.
Well, rounded it out, and really the story around cyber resilience, or let's say modern data protection, I referred to it before, was just the realization that there's a lot in the portfolio that we have, either that we built natively or that we have acquired, but creating this holistic view end-to-end of what our customers need, because it's not just about backups anymore, right? You flash back 10 years ago, and it was just sort of like, well, we do backups, we're fine, and maybe we have a little replication sprinkled here and there in case a meteor hits our data center, but there's so much more that goes into it. And so I love that we position it now as cyber resilience, as a practice, right? That there's specialists that go out and help, and you're certainly a part of that related to the resilience service. Have you always been in the data protection space? Is that kind of where you cut your teeth?
Not so much. It's kind of interesting to see, where how careers evolve over time.
Right.
Started a lot in the file space.
Okay.
And then actually spent a lot of time in massive scale object storage. It's kind of funny back in when Amazon first published the S3 spec. So we're looking at like 2000. Well, they published in 2008, but think like 2010 timeframe. I remember actually before I went to CleverSafe, and we sold that to IBM. We were a small team and I were pushing object storage as the next innovation. And this is when things like Hadoop were big, and everybody's like, I need to do massive scale things with Hadoop. And I would go to them, I'd say, well, S3 object storage is probably going to give you better scale and performance. Now, back then, a lot of them were saying, no, I do it this way, But there were a few that were willing to be innovative and build something new, the ones that were a little bit farther ahead of their time. And the people that started that then went and built massive scale systems that were, exabyte level solutions that we'd go in and then help them go build those and work together to build them. Because nothing 15 years ago was, really ready for exabyte level scale. Everything required, some joint development work, some figuring out, hey, when you put massive load on massive systems, where do things break? And you'd go figure out where that stuff broke, and you continue to innovate in that space to build them. And, a lot of those then turned into things that we see today that are, these massive scale out systems that, things like AI come around and everybody's like, well, I'm building this from the ground up anyways. Let's build it with new technologies. And they don't go back to these old distributed file systems. They go to the tools that are available today that have already solved those problems,
Yeah.
like object storage. So, it's great to see where that has come. I mean, 10, 12 years ago, I was trying to advocate and work with developers to get it here. So, I feel a little bit, proud that the industry has really sort of, with these things like AI, caught up,
Yeah.
to
Sometimes
what
it
we were
takes a
saying
while,
10 years
right?
ago.
Sometimes
And,
it takes a while to be validated,
it,
right?
it really does, especially in tech. We think we
Yeah.
move fast, but I think in reality, it's not as fast as we think it
No,
is.
it's not. No, well, we have to make it seem fast. You're also a Denver guy, so that's why I love having
Also a
you
Denver
on. I'm
guy.
actually, I don't know, by the time I publish this, I will already have headed out, but I'm heading
Nice.
out to the family cabin that we have about an hour southwest of Denver to open it up for the
Nice.
summer. It is not winterized, so I have to head out there, but I'm going over Memorial Day weekend. It's always super fun because it's way up in the mountains, super relaxing. The cell phone signal kind of reaches there, but not really. And we don't have internet, and there's not even TV. So
As long as you can resist buying a Starlink, you'll be all right.
Well, yeah, I think my parents did that, and they're maybe going to bring it this summer. But I will be there before they go and do that. Now it would be helpful because then I could actually sit and do work. But
Well,
yeah.
my son installed one of the minis in his Bronco, so
Okay.
he's
For
got
driving
access
around?
everywhere.
Oh, that
Yeah.
sounds really safe. Where are you? Where are you in town? In Denver? I think I know this. Or
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
I'm
know.
I'm on the southeast.
You're on the southeast
side.
part.
So,
Okay.
one of the popular bedroom communities of the Denver community. But I've been there, man. I've been there
Like Highlands
25
Ranch
years.
down that way?
No, on the Parker side.
Oh, on the
So
Parker
southeast
side. Okay.
Southwest
got
is
it. It's
Highlands
my
Ranch.
aunt
Parker.
and uncle live in.
Yeah.
They actually moved in Parker Ranch back when it was still dirt roads and gravel and everything.
I have
and
friends.
it's all moved out to them, right? Out that way.
Well, I mean, Parker Road. I mean, I have friends who lived out there when it was a 2-lane dirt road.
Yeah.
And they used to have fuel delivered to them in an above ground tank because they were so far away from any gas station. And now there's a gas station on every corner. But so that's grown a lot. That whole area, Highlands Ranch, Parker, Castle Rock, all around there. But Colorado's a beautiful area, especially those mountains. We get up there, whether it's the state parks, the national parks, all the time. In fact, I'm heading up this weekend. We'll get out to our favorite place. If you haven't been out there, Glenwood Springs.
Oh, no,
First
I've been
place,
to Glenwood. I've been to,
Yeah, first place in Colorado with power,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah. Our family used to drive from here because we're from San Jose, from the Bay Area. And every summer we take 2 or 3 weeks to go to that same cabin that I'm going out to this weekend. And as a treat, my parents we would stop and stay at Glenwood Springs and go in the giant pools.
The giant hot springs.
Hot springs pools.
A lot of fun.
Just amazing, super fun. We'll
It's a great area.
have fun with that. You started as a sysadmin, and certainly one of the commonalities with a lot of the specialists that I bring onto the program is that they are or were practitioners, right? Actually working hands-on and then kind of evolved into these tech specialist roles or decided, I want to go help people as opposed to actually doing that. What did that role teach you about, and what did you learn, and how has it benefited you today with what you do with folks?
I mean, I think all of us, especially in these builder type technologist roles, started getting our hands on things.
Yeah.
When we were younger, that's why we went into, the precursor of STEM things, which is, we wanted to go, build things. We like to see how it works. We'd go build the first PCs, back when nobody knew how to do that, and understand how all the pieces fit together. And any technologist, really needs to have that understanding of how do things go together? How do things work? It can't be just a black box.
Yeah.
So, we started there and did some internships in college, which was a lot of fun. I actually, when I go talk to, like the high school career days and things like that, they always want to know like what you're doing and all this stuff. But I usually spend more time impressing upon the kids that regardless of what they do, they need to find a way to do an internship.
Yeah.
Because when you see the career trajectory of the kids that did internships in college versus the ones that didn't, it's vastly different. The ones that get their hands on early, at least in my experience, have invariably have greater success as they get out into the job market. So I always try to impress upon them to do that. I did that and actually ended up in a couple of sysadmin roles with some big telcos, and then actually they were all pretty much big telcos. But A couple things that you learn in there is one, I learned that I still liked building things,
Yeah.
and that's how I ended up getting into the vendor world. Is I worked with one vendor, with a gentleman who was like, "Hey, you need to come work with us on the systems engineering side," and I ended up taking that path. And actually, the guy that hired me back in 2004. Kept in touch with him in the Colorado area, and a few years ago we ended up hiring him here at Pure. So it's funny how we all stick together and
But
keep entering our
it is about
orbits.
those connections and the relationships,
Yeah.
right? And so probably one of the reasons that the kids that are doing the internships have that is that you just end up meeting a bunch of people, and you never know when you'll cross paths with someone. I mean, that's how I landed here at Pure was with somebody I went to school with and that our families know. And kind of the first job I ever got out of college in tech at a really crummy semiconductor company was a girl I dated in high school, actually, right? So it's that kind of thing. It's just keep an open mind. You never know, but manage and maintain those relationships.
That network and the relationships is sometimes it takes the people a while to understand.
Yeah.
Like when I first got in the industry, I thought I'm going to be a great technologist, and that's how I'm going to be successful. And then you realize that that is barely a part of the equation. When one time when I was doing interviews, one guy pulled me in for an interview, and it was probably the most interesting interview I'd ever done, due to its brevity and the content. So he pulls me in. He goes, "Chad, thanks for coming to the interview. I want you to know that I'm not going to hire you, but I wanted to talk to you." And I'm like, like, I don't know, I'm like 22 at the time or something like that. And I'm like, I have no idea where this is going to go. I'm like, what's going to happen here? And he goes, "Well, you remind me a lot about myself. And the one piece of advice I want to give you is that to be successful, to achieve better levels of success than you're on the path for now, is you've got to understand how to marry the technology that you're great at with the business and the business needs, the problems that are trying to be solved by the business."
Yeah.
So we talked about that a little bit. And it's interesting because if you look at the 25 or 30 years since I had that conversation, everything that we talk about in the industry is essentially, like even in our tech organizations, our specialist organizations, it's exactly what he said.
Yeah.
It's how do you marry what is happening with the business? What's the problem the business is trying to solve with the technology that you know how to apply? And so, I mean, he had a wisdom that, very young Chad didn't really understand. And perhaps it's taken me a little bit of time to fully understand, but, that was a really interesting piece of advice back then that I think is prescient. And we want to, make sure that we, impress on, the early in career people to understand, but also impress upon ourselves as don't forget the foundations. Don't forget first principles of what we're doing here, which is solving business problems.
And also that any interview is a good interview, right? I mean, that's the other part, right? Is you get an interview, you take it, whether you think you have a good likelihood of getting the role or not, just because you get the experience and meet somebody and make a connection. Because I do know people. I mean, there's a woman who just joined here at Everpure, who I interviewed back in 2019, right? And she didn't get the job then, but she found something else that was a fit, and obviously wanted to work here, but still, made that connection. And then she reached out and said, "Hey, do you remember me?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I interviewed for this SAP, product manager role, and it didn't work out, but now you landed here, which is great. And we knew each other already."
And that works, across things. I mean, it's not just people.
Yeah.
It's not just relationships. It's not just, jobs. But I mean, I even see that recently in the product side.
Yeah.
We had one customer that, looked at what we've been building, was like, I need a few other things, let me go this other direction. And, we said, cool, look, let's stay in touch. 9 months later, they're giving me a call and they're like, yeah, that other direction didn't work out. So, it's important to keep, the door open and those relationships open, whether 15 years later, my, I'm referring my old manager to take a job, or, people are saying, hey, I don't want to hire you, but I want to give you good advice.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good. Well, I want to take what you said about marrying the technology with the business problem and dive into the Everpure Resilience service.
Yeah.
See how I did that segue? That's why I'm the podcast
Excellent.
host here. Yeah, right.
You've got the experience.
Yes, I've done a few of these here and there. I want to go back kind of the beginning, right? Because this was brought in via an acquisition, and I remember when that happened. Several years ago.
Yeah.
I think we're there.
I think that was about 4 years ago.
Yeah, it was 3 or 4, but we all kind of scratched our heads and went, we're okay. I get it. It's protection. It's data protection. Where and how does this fit? But it was always also really interesting in that this was a service, right? And you go back 3 or 4 years ago, and look, we've moved into data management, and there's digital experience services, and we've expanded the subscription portfolio. But what stood out about it as an interesting acquisition is this is something that was subscription based, right? It was a software based type of solution. But hit for folks the origin on that, since we've got all different levels of understanding about
no, absolutely.
what it is.
We've been looking at the cyber resilience portfolio for a long time. And you can solve that in a lot of ways. You can solve that in the traditional data protection or backup use space. You can solve that, with array-based technologies. Now we've got cybersecurity, which is kind of focused on network edge and endpoint type of things. So this technology came in because we were looking at how do we move away from what our partners do so well.
Yeah.
And there's not really area for us to innovate in that space because they do it so well.
And that's why we partner
We've
with
got
them.
Pure as a target, but we partner with them, and that's great business.
Yeah.
But we wanted to get more into that sort of active operational resilience space. And we wanted to deliver it as a service, because by delivering something as a service, it kind of changes the whole engagement model with software from, less of a traditional waterfall software development to an operation model that's more cloud-like, and we can kind of, continue to innovate and deploy, on demand. But it also gives us, operational insights so we can be more responsive to customers. So we made a small acquisition of a company that had built a AWS or a VMware to AWS disaster, like operational recovery, disaster recovery technology. And so we acquired that, and we spent probably a year or so building the foundational pieces to put that into Pure One, or Everpure One now. Is what we're calling that. And so that allowed us to turn it from more of a traditional software model and take some pieces that had already been built in Pure One, tie this intellectual property together, and build what we call disaster recovery as a service.
DRAS, right?
DRAS.
Yeah.
And so, for those who've been following Pure for a while,
Yeah.
you remember the DRAS name that we had probably 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And the focus on that was VMware to AWS.
Okay.
And that was a great starting point because, anytime you're building something, going back to the whole need for iteration, is you've got to start somewhere. And you've got to start with a problem that you can solve, but allows you to build the other pieces around it. So it wasn't just disaster recovery as a service. It was building the whole operational infrastructure that we needed to deliver more than just disaster recovery as a service, but where disaster recovery as a service was the first use case. So we took that acquisition. We took some pieces that we had built into Pure One, and we put them together, and we launched the first version, which was VMware to AWS. And that's still available today. We still have a good number of customers that are utilizing the cloud for what it's good for, which is, on-demand elastic resources that you can use temporarily or ephemerally, and then, tear them down when you're done. And so that was a great initial use case that we'd built into the product, and we just used that to build off of.
Yeah, that was the
over time.
foundational.
It was a
element,
foundational
right?
piece. Yeah. And it's worked well for us.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the connection in there. And we got Suresh.
And we got Suresh
right?
out of
That's
that.
We use Suresh at
So-
Accelerate, and I'm using him coming up here at
Absolutely.
Accelerate. And he's a smart cookie. And back to your point about building, he was really the original builder that saw the
was.
light and architected this.
So we had acquired him and his company as part of that. So he came with that. He leads the product effort with product management now. So pretty much everything that you've seen in the last 4 years is due to his vision and his influence and his leadership. with the team that we have. And we've got a good-sized team that we host out of our Prague development office that are all local out there, and they do everything from development to our DevOps. And I think that, if we were to dig into that a little bit, I think that is a nascent capability that, may not be understood yet, like what the impact is. And so what I mean by that is, now that we're delivering as a service, we get real-time perspective and view into metadata operations. We've been clear from a security perspective. We're not going to take customer data. We don't want any of your actual data. But in order to provide a service, you've got to have metadata. You've got to have some visibility into what's happening.
Right?
Telemetry and things
exactly.
like that.
Yeah.
But now that we have that, we can see operations and behavior in real time, which means if things go awry, it's no longer the model of waiting for your operations team to see something's wrong, open a ticket.
You get rid of that whole diagnosis and
that all goes
get
away.
Rid of those steps because you're already there.
Because we're already there. Because we already have visibility to what's happening. We can, in some cases, automatically remediate it. We can reach out. I even see in the future us being more tightly integrated with customers, operations centers, to be able to respond to things quickly.
Yeah.
And it may just be, hey, here's something that you've done wrong. It may be a, no op. It may be something we don't need to do. It may be something we need to fix. It may be something the customer needs to fix. But all of those have a shorter path to resolution, as we build these things out. And I think, a lot of, as people move towards, more as a service type of things, I think businesses are going to have to get familiar with how do we tie together not just locked away operation centers, but how do we coordinate operation centers, across vendors.
Yeah.
And, I think we're going to be one of the leaders in that space.
Yeah. Well, and it came along at the right time too, right?
Yeah.
Because a little bit prior to that, we were just bringing out some of the subscription-based services, but it was really just around how can you subscribe and use SLAs to connect to what you need with the storage, and it's expanded. Now it's expanded at the heart of our ability to look at the telemetry data and make those connections, but when this acquisition happened and then some of the development that's happened with it, it's almost grown as the portfolio of offerings in the as-a-service portfolio that we bring out. It's not just storage as a service, even though we've talked about it that way for a while. It's really data management as a service, data security, cybersecurity as a service, and that's increasingly what people want. Whether you,
I mean, we started with how do we give you a cloud-like infrastructure model on premises, and now we're expanding to how do we improve upon that to let you recognize better outcomes. And by better outcomes, which I know is probably an overused term in the industry, is how do we make things more responsive?
Yeah.
How do we reduce SLAs? And doing that, how do we make it simpler? How do we make it durable? How do we make it provable and demonstrable to our customers? All of this used to be multiple hardware and software pieces that people would have to integrate themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, in the market, I've seen us be able to replace multiple third-party vendors with a single product, and it really drives that simplification in that now you've got Pure's hardware, but we can give you some software on top of it, some as a service that's better together and lets you simplify your procurement, your operations, your software stacks while we're providing that to you.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, there is. I think one of the other interesting shifts and why we're in and around, you went from modern data protection to how we position cyber resilience now as a company is this shifting role of the chief information security officer. And this is what I pulled for our stat of the episode segment that I like to do on these episodes. But I think this was a Gartner quote that you pointed me to. By 2028, half of CISOs are going to be asked to own disaster recovery in addition to incident response, and what that reflects, basically a broader organizational shift. Because I would say before, security and the CISO role, which really didn't kind of exist, it was just sort of, malware and spam and phishing and email and things, the stuff that employees interact. Now it's far more than that, but you see the CISO role expanding to where they have a much broader remit,
Oh, yeah.
which now includes the things that are going on in central IT.
No, it absolutely is, and we're even seeing. It's interesting when I read that original report from Gartner is that we've been seeing that in our customers
Yeah.
already. You've got the traditional IT infrastructure, which was like, hey, I'm going to do business continuity, and then I'm going to do disaster recovery, and then I'm going to do backup, and I'm going to do recovery, and you take those pieces, and over that time, as you said, the security piece has grown, which started as, hey, how do we protect people from phishing and ransomware and things like that, to a board level strategic initiative, and it's become a board level initiative because when your security fails, when you can't recover from it, you lose face in branding, you lose potentially revenue, you're not making revenue, maybe there's cost with it, maybe there's regulatory issues, maybe there's fines. Some countries are even applying those fines to officers of companies. And so it's no longer just this nebulous thing that occurs and is an irritation. It can now, be something that is so impacting to the business that it could be, business ending, even in some cases. And even recently, the last week, you see events with like Instructure and things like that have become very, very public. With attackers going after them. So this innovation is really saying that, hey, what we had in traditional IT and what we had with security is now this board level issue, and we need to treat it as something that has that level of visibility and has that level of investment and the need to correct it. The need to correct it, because the CISOs are now saying it's not just that I need to be defensive, because you can be defensive, but an attacker is always going to find a way in, whether it's a human mistake or whether they're just compromising code or they're just faster and smarter. They used AI to get something in faster than you. You will have an event. But this specific observation where they're taking over disaster recovery, what that means practically is that everybody's admitting to the fact that the recovery piece is now critical. They're admitting that they will be attacked, that there will be an event, and that if they can recover fast. Now, fast is somewhat subjective, but I would say within a couple hours, maybe within tens of minutes. Think of it like Dora, recover in 20 minutes, turn it off to UAT, and then progress on and get it back within 2 hours. That type of recoverability saves the board a lot of grief, because now, well, you may lose an hour or two of revenue downtime, but maybe there's less perception of it. Maybe your brand isn't as impacted. Maybe you can replay those transactions. There's a whole lot of things that could occur in there that means it's not as impactful to your business. And we've even seen in forensic analysis with some customers that have been attacked, that they come in, they see that, they've got pure technologies that provide indelibility, that provide the rapid recovery, that allow them to bring entire application stacks or data centers back fast. They'll turn around and leave. And why do they turn around and leave? Because it's so unlikely for them to get any payment out of it that it's not worth their time. And so being able to defend against them by saying, hey, it's not going to be worth your time is important as well. So all those areas really feed into the fact that there's going to be this convergence of security and IT, especially at the board level, to be able to ensure that they've got the right position. And we're using that even to drive some of the roadmap and the integrations that we're doing in our product going forward, realizing that it's not just a traditional IT buyer, IT person that's interested, but now it's the security people that are going to say, you know what, I can do something unique here. And that uniqueness is, not only are you solving a problem that I've got, but the whole ecosystem that they've got is really interesting. I call it the Apple corollary, because I think I heard this as a quote from somebody at Apple, but I never was really able to find the origin from it. So we'll just, somebody said something similar to it at one point, but it was that people like to buy things that work with other things they've bought. I think the quote came from somebody talking about the iPhone or something like that, and why those ecosystems work really well. But if you look at it from a traditional IT perspective, well, you want it to work with the storage and the hardware and the operation stacks that I've bought. But the innovation now that we're looking at is how do we make it work with the security pieces that people are buying? If we can tie in with the CISO's investments and say, we're going to make it simpler and more responsive, build clean rooms or IREs or do disaster, recover from ransomware or whatever it is. If we can automate that for you so that by the time your SOC sees an alert up on a dashboard, we've already built all that for you, and they just need to say, well, it was a false positive, never mind, or yes, something's actually occurring, let's promote that up into production. Your response time has gone from days, hours, weeks, months, whatever it is, to minutes.
Yeah.
And that's what the board's looking to see from these events.
And it follows the pattern that we've gone with augmenting parts of the portfolio. And I hit on this a little bit earlier, but I look at the partnerships that we've added in the last 12 to 18 months, including, some of those cyber partners that we've featured here on the program as well, but also building this notion, right? I mean, one of the talk tracks that we go out and talk with folks about is that tiered resilience, and it hits right into what you're talking about with, it's not only about detecting and understand that something happens, but what are those layers of response that you can bring into play?
Absolutely.
Such that when something does happen, to your point, the attacker says, oh, this isn't worth it, right? I'm not going to get anything out of this because there's too many things I have to deal with or go through, or you've shrunk that time to address.
Exactly.
Right, which is super super critical. You I love when people throw acronyms out. You very quickly threw out clean room and IRE, and I know those are things that are related to the solution, right, that you specifically focus on. We've been talking broadly about cyber things, which I love, and it relates to that quote. But I want to get into, the rapid recovery SLA, but also the aspects around clean room and IRE, and just explaining for folks what we actually do, what actually we do in that space.
And all of these are things that we've built upon, other investments, that we've made. Like the original MDP that we talked about earlier came into existence because we realized that, our DFMs, our direct flash modules could be applied to the recovery problem and really solve the problem of, hey, it takes 10 days or 20 days to recover from some of these traditional appliances. Now we can do it in a couple of hours.
You shrink it.
There's real value there. And so as the markets, start to see, well, okay, I can restore from backup, faster now. Well, what are other use cases? Oh, I've got snapshots, but, it's a manual process that I have to undergo. Well, those were, popular before we really saw the convergence of cybersecurity, traditional IT type of things. So, as that market evolved, we started taking similar concepts and giving them personalities, different personalities. And so, over 20 years, you would say, okay, I've got a DR environment. There's a huge investment in that. And then some people started saying, I've got test DR environments or bubble environments, things where I could, test. Then you started seeing those being built in the cloud. And those have continued to get additional personalities like we see here, like isolated recovery environments, IREs, or clean rooms, and other variations upon very similar concepts. And that's why we can use similar technologies to affect all of these outcomes, is because there's just, personality adjustments that you can define in those. Customers can come and say, if we have one of our security vendors detect a in-memory event on a virtual machine, they can pass us metadata. We can take a forensic snapshot. We can go build a clean room, which is essentially isolated. Yeah. Meaning,
you set it aside.
There's no we've built your environment, but there's no network connectivity. Maybe there's other limitations. Maybe you can only get into it, from a console perspective, or maybe there's a limited jump station, but that allows you to go investigate that. Maybe it's a forensics investigation. Maybe, you want to just promote production, things like that too. And those tend to be very pointed, whereas isolated recovery environments tend to have, larger sets of the environment, but usually a subset, whereas disaster recovery is usually, hey, let's figure out how we restore an entire data center. Yeah. Again, those are all like variations in personality on very similar constructs that we're able to build off of. Because, if you can recover 10,000 virtual machines in a DR event, you're going to be able to quickly and easily do 5 for a clean room or 100 for an IRE, type of thing. So, we see these terms coming up, and they're really just personality variations that are configuration differences that we can automate and allow you to fine tune it. We see these terms even with some of our software vendors. I mean, Epic's a huge one that we work with, and they're stating that, for customers to maintain honor roll certification, they ultimately need to have an IRE.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that we can go, facilitate and automate so that customers can maintain their best-in-class positioning with other vendors in these ecosystems.
Yeah, I love that. I want to get into a little bit on the resilience service, right, on Everpure Protect. Now, I have to keep doing the
Everpure Resilience service.
Yes,
sir.
resilience service, lowercase s, as Suresh keeps reminding me with the catalog
Yes.
and Accelerate, which is good. And what stands out, and I always do things anecdotally, and I even told you this story, I think, from Accelerate last year when I bumped into you. I was on the elevator coming down from my room back to the floor at our Accelerate conference and just standing next to a guy, and he kind of said hi, and I noticed he had a badge and went, oh, you work at, whatever. He was an attendee. He was a customer. And because I manage breakouts and experiences and what people sit in for sessions and learn, I was curious, I guess it was a long hotel ride. We must have been at one of the top floors. And I said, so what's been interesting to you at this event, right? Have you gone to breakouts? Yes. Have you gone to the mini theater sessions? Yes. Did you go to the main stage? Yeah. He had done everything, which is great. We want somebody to have a rich attendee experience. And I said, what's most interesting? Like, what has stood out to you the most? And the first thing out of his mouth at that time with that brand, we said, the Pure Protect. This is something that I think our company can use right now because of the way that we operate. And I think since that time, you and I have talked because you come to town frequently, and the momentum has picked up, right? And you're seeing this now in a number of industries, to your point that you just mentioned. Okay, there's a different flavor maybe of how it's getting used, but you're seeing great momentum around uptake of this service.
Oh,
why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started with the AWS piece, but, and that gave people the flexibility. But where it really took off was when we integrated directly with our FlashArray products.
Okay.
And so, at Accelerate last year, we had actually announced a lot of those pieces, integration with the FlashArray, some concepts that we're calling recovery zones, and those are really what made it, usable and real, for a lot of these customers. Because, the big value on FlashArray is, all of our competitors, primary competitors in the market, and even people that don't even do anything close to what we're doing, they like to operate at the VMware level, at the Broadcom VMware level. But there's changes in that space. I mean, Broadcom's making changes. They're changing how APIs are supported and interacted with. Those models come with requirements: load on servers, compute resources you need to do, operational overhead. And so when we did our FlashArray integration, we upended all of that, and we said, we're just going to manage it. We're going to let the FlashArray do what the FlashArray does best, which is it's going to replicate, it's going to clone, it's going to provide storage to the infrastructure, and we do it all over API calls. And that really was the catalyst for our largest accounts, and a lot of our growth was the integration with the FlashArray, and building on top of that. And then, so many pieces that come after that with, the ecosystems integrations and stuff like that. We're continuing to innovate in how do we make it more flexible too? Because ultimately, a lot of customers, traditionally in not even cyber resilience, but when people thought of it as disaster recovery, it was very fixed.
Yeah.
Failover, failback. Very binary. Even data protection. I'm going to back it up and maybe I can restore it fast. But you have to ask yourself at some point, like, how do people want to utilize this in new ways? And we started seeing some of the precursors to that where people would, clone Oracle databases and be able to refresh development environments. Well, a lot of those concepts are just being repurposed into things like the personalities that
Yeah.
we're talking about
Yeah.
here. So as we build upon the flash array work and the AWS work, we look at things like recovery zones where instead of thinking of it in a very binary fashion, it's a very flexible fashion. It gives you, as Rob Lee, our CTO, likes to use the term optionality.
Yeah.
Gives you optionality in what you do with the data. You can send it anywhere. You can recover it into any one of these personalities. You can then subsequently send it somewhere else. You can decide to promote it. You can decide to clean it up. You can do all of these things in concurrently across the board. So that level of flexibility is going to be the next jump in usability, because now operations teams, instead of having to build and manage scripts or use, as I mentioned earlier, 3 or 4 different tools to achieve something,
Yeah.
it's simply a runbook definition within Pure One.
Yeah. And single
within Pure Protect.
subscription based, right? I mean, so
And
you
it-
got the
yeah.
subscription based, but the other key point and caveat is you're doing all these things outside of disruption to prod as well, right? And I did a database podcast yesterday with someone
Yes.
and we got into the whole prod, non-prod, whatever thing. And you're describing these scenarios of cloning an Oracle database and putting it in this environment to do things, and you're not messing with production,
Yeah.
right? You're just keeping it separate, but providing that flexibility and that simplicity to go and do all those things.
Well,
And it's interesting. I love when we as technologists build and offer things, customers always go out and find other things to do with them that we didn't think about.
That we didn't think about,
that we didn't think
exactly.
about. It
Exactly.
always happens.
Yeah, no, it does. Well, and even go back to the CISO board thing. You know, what does the board need from, a CISO and an IT tech leader is, what they're saying has to be demonstrably provable.
Yeah.
And so that's where these test environments come into play. Is, okay, great. You've said you can do all this. We've invested in all of this. Where's the evidence? Like, can you prove and show me that when an event occurs, that we're okay?
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of these personalities come into play. And as you mentioned, these test environments is, you need to be able to periodically be testing, because invariably, with just the natural churn of IT, somebody's going to deploy something, and it's not going to follow some policy or process. Probably not on purpose. Just somebody missed something. And it's going to, sometimes the only way you can find that to remediate it is in a test failover.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that regularly, then what do I need to fix? How long is it going to take? What does the runbook look like? Because the last thing that you want is to have everybody stressed out because there's a ransomware event occurring and you're trying to recover, and everybody's trying to figure out how to build and fix problems while an event's occurring.
While you're operating.
You want it to be as hands-off as possible.
Yeah, right.
Push the big red button and have it bring it online and have as little work as possible that somebody who's stressed out in the middle of the night needs to think about, because that's where more mistakes occur.
Yeah.
And that's why we want people to continue to test and evaluate that, because if everybody's comfortable with the process so that it's ingrained in them, that it's almost second nature, then the success is tremendously improved.
But I think you had to make the test and evaluation easy in the first place,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because there is, and I used this joke on the database podcast yesterday, and I'll use it again here, is, right, one of the ways you used to have to punish DBAs is make them test backups, right? Because testing backups was painful and time-consuming, and nobody wanted to do it, or, test replication as well. And so now there's this technology that comes where and I love it, you keep talking about, like, constantly testing constantly, but it's because you have these environments, you have these clean rooms, you have these IREs where you can go do this and it's not disrupting production. And that's huge, right?
Absolutely.
So you're making it easier. You're facilitating the ability for people to test or look at anomalies, or we might have seen something, we can go check it out without it being some big type of event. And maybe it's nothing, but it's better than the alternative.
Yeah. Makes it easy to build. It makes it even easier to clean up.
Yeah.
And, to the database example, you don't have to spend hours watching a progress meter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Go do something more interesting.
Which, I mean, who knows? Maybe there's some people that liked getting coffee during the progress meter.
I was just about to say the coffee thing, right? That is a chance to go do some coffee. Well, kind of bring it home on the whole Everpure Resilience service. Somebody out there is listening. They're like the customer I had in the elevator who goes, "Oh, I got to check that out." Like, what are hit the main points, like the use case. If somebody is struggling with X, why would they want to use this?
Yeah, well, So what we've built here with this is really this great tool set, that gives a lot of options. So if somebody wants to get familiar with it, hopefully it's somebody that is wanting to continue to experiment and build.
Yeah.
Because we're a technology that's going to change the way you approach things a little bit, but in the end, it'll be a lot simpler. So to get involved with it, we've got a bunch of resources that are public. If you're a Pure One user, we've got documentation on the Pure One support portal.
Yep.
If you, whether or not you are, we're starting to publish a lot of information on the Pure community site.
Thank you for that. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
I'm going to be talking even more about it at Accelerate
I
as
love
well.
it. Yep, we got your
Some
session.
live, some live deployments, some live using of the community. So we're publishing a lot of stuff up there as well, and we're continuing to add things incrementally. So that's a great resource to get familiar with. What are the steps that you need? Some of who's using it, how to use it, and things like that. And then last one is to utilize our community edition.
Yeah.
So we've created an easy to deploy. It's actually as easy as the production was. There's really, to be honest, there's really no difference other than we do a capacity limit, 5 terabytes.
It's the same,
fully
right?
featured.
It's not like you created a different code set.
It's not even
it
a
is the
different
same.
version.
Yeah,
It's all the same pieces. But we see a lot utilizing that because you can spend a little bit more time looking at it. You can test it, with your environment, your applications. It lets you do test and production failovers, or whatever it is that you're looking to achieve. And then when you're ready to buy, you just transact and the license converts, and you don't have to redeploy anything. So those combinations, the documentation, the Pure Community, our community portal, the Community Edition, are great ways to get your hands on this and get familiar with it. Because you can do everything that you would do with 10,000 VMs, you can do with the 5 or the 10 VMs that we give you the ability to do with now. And we've seen, tremendous uptick. I would say there's probably, I could hazard a guess on a percentage, but I would say the vast majority, of our users are taking a path through the Community Edition and the Pure Community portal.
And that's how people like to try it,
Absolutely.
There's nothing worse than getting on your phone and seeing a game or something that looks interesting, but it has a price on it. And that's kind of gone away. Maybe I'm dating myself since everything is now in-app purchases.
Yes.
But there's nothing worse than going, I'm going to buy something for $2.99 and then I'm trying it and I don't like it. I just wasted that money.
Exactly.
As opposed to, okay, let me check it out. Let me kick the tires. Oh, this is super useful. Oh, I didn't know it could also do this for me. All right, now I've hit that capacity limit. Okay, cool. It converts to subscription, so you don't even have to go through a lot of complicated paperwork and POs and crazy things like that because it is an as-a-service offering.
Well, and it even lets the evaluators and the people who are going to operate it, it gives them provable, demonstrable information so that when they go to justify something with their board, they can say, you know what, we've already put it through its paces. We've tested it. It's not just us trusting Pure. And there's a lot of people that trust Pure.
Sure.
And that's great.
Sure.
But in this case, they can actually stand up and say, we did all of these workflows. It's better than the alternatives. It's better than what we were doing in these 5 different ways or whatever it is. And it puts them in a much better position when they go stand in front of the board or the buyers to justify their decision. And if we can help enable them to achieve that easier and with more data, then that's great. And that's what this is here for.
Well, they can show it. It's not a leap of
Absolutely.
faith, right? It's not a leap of faith of, is this, have you used it? I mean, like, yeah, we've used it, and here's what it did, and now we just need to go in.
And it's interesting because we see,
more.
The customers that do that. Traditionally in IT, people are like, I want to do a 3-year investment.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then we'll go evaluate things. And, that's a decent balance of, costs versus risk and things like that because, a lot can happen in 3 years. A lot of nothing can happen in 3 years, but a lot could potentially happen in 3 years. But with these models, we see people, making longer term investments in Pure. Now, granted, they've, typically been Pure customers as well. But, when you see this and you see it hands on, you're more willing to say, let's give me a better subscription rate and invest for 5 years.
Yeah.
type
But it's
of thing.
back to, and I found your quote, right? People are already using Pure.
Yeah.
People buy things that work with other things they bought, right? So
Yes.
I'm not surprised that this is additive
Mm-hmm.
to existing customers always have, because they just go, oh, this is something that has the brand behind it and the investment and the technology
Exactly.
and the same hallmarks that we achieve with customer first and simplicity and being super intuitive and all that. I love that. And we got a bunch of sessions on this at Accelerate, so I'm super excited.
Absolutely.
Chad will be delivering one of our mini theater sessions going into the community edition
Mm-hmm.
and doing some demos. And then we've got you and Suresh doing 2 different breakouts. They pulled a fast one on me because
Okay.
DX submitted a session, and then another one came through cyber. And you know what? Multiple opportunities to hear the same.
I am more
or
than happy to
similar
get
stories.
up and keep advocating for
Yes.
what we've built here.
Yes.
I'm excited. I'm proud of what the team's built.
I know.
They've built a great product, and it's following a great plan, and I think it's a great team.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see people get a lot of value out of it.
I know, and I'm happy it's part of the portfolio. It's just part of the story now, not this kind of weird one-off, what did we acquire kind of thing. Like it's evolved.
People looked at me a little sideways at the beginning when I said what we were doing. And
Yeah.
I'm like, just
hang
we've got a
on.
vision.
Yeah.
Give us some time to go execute on it, and it'll become clear.
Yeah, and we're there.
And we're
it's
there.
awesome. All right, I'm going to put you through hot takes here.
Oh, excellent.
Real
Should be
quick,
fun.
yes. And we'll make this one maybe cyber-oriented, right? So question 1 is always you looking at all the people you talk to. You talk to a lot of IT folks. What's something that you think they're missing today or not paying enough attention to in the cyber resilience space?
Where I think a lot of what the business leaders need to be looking at is how do we become more demonstrably defensive?
Okay.
For these attackers is, we see a lot of situations where the attackers are able to come in, they're able to spread around, and the outcome that they're looking for is how do we not pay the ransom?
Yeah.
And so, if you go to RSA, there's 1,000 vendors on the floor there. And to the point of buy things that work together. Most of them aren't working together. And they're not working with storage. And they're not working with your data protection software. So there's really kind of these 3 pillars now of where there's data protection software that is great, and they're adding cyber resilience pieces
that's
to
been
it.
a trend.
But it's, but that's always after the fact. That's, I've got to take another backup, and I've got data, and I can go give you some insight about what happened and maybe where it started. Then you've got stuff on the storage side where people are, adding capabilities onto storage arrays, and you see this in the tier 1 storage market, but that's making the assumption that things are hitting storage.
Yeah, it's
and
limited to
that's an assumption that I don't think applies anymore.
Yeah.
Because now we're seeing attacks occurring in memory. There are attacks within 30 minutes. There are attacks at the network edges where they're detecting them. So where we need to innovate, that shift is instead of thinking of it way after the fact, we're thinking of it within storage. It's to the ecosystem play is how do we get these pieces to talk together so that when something I've invested in upstream, like a network or an endpoint detection system, how do those pieces drive real-time action in my cyber resilience, my cyber recovery strategy? And I think that's where a lot of people need to start to invest and think about is how do we become more responsive in real time? Because, attackers are hitting and spreading out within 30 minutes now. I think we're seeing that they're able to spread across. Most of them are doing in memory. Disks aren't seeing it. Backups aren't seeing it. Your endpoint detection is sometimes seeing it. Your network is sometimes seeing it. So we need to get better at tying all those pieces together. And that's a lot of the investment that we've been making. We'll show a lot more of it at Accelerate. But, I really think that that's where, we need to take those 1,000 vendors at RSA and be able to communicate better with them so that real-time action can be taken. And if that real-time action is simply, hey, we see, a ransom event in memory on a database server, go take a forensic snapshot, go build a clean room, continue on. So I think that's where a lot of this, needs to start getting some focus, and that's where boards are going to see real outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
real perceptible, tangible benefit.
Yeah, and maybe where the CISOs are having more of a role to see across the organization, like the surface area has definitely expanded, and it's
Exactly.
not just about your backups or
Well,
just
and that's
basic
why,
security stuff. Yeah,
Gartner made their quote
yeah,
is,
yeah,
the CISOs were the left and IT were the two right.
yeah,
And that in the future, you can't have those isolated pillars.
yeah.
They all have to work together.
Well,
And they're just really saying that the more adaptable, the more nimble, the more mature organizations are going to be at the forefront of integrating those functions together.
yeah. Well, and cyber is everybody's job in the company
Yes.
anyway, right? Not just those orgs.
That's what our compliance teams tell us.
Yeah, I know, I know. Well, yeah, that's the simulated phishing emails that we get, right?
Yes.
Those are always fun. You're sysad, so you must have had some kind of oops moment where you blew something up or made a blunder. You're talking about change control and blast radius here in the notes, right?
Definitely. It's kind of funny. Back in my sysadmin days, I was implementing a new technology, which actually is still around today. But back then it was pretty nascent, and I remember directly working with the CTO and having some entertaining conversations with him. But we rolled it out, and actually it's used across the globe now. That 25 years later, that technology, we actually use it at Pure. I won't mention what it was, but
yeah,
so I was working as a sysadmin. We're like, hey, we're going to roll it all out. So we do all the change control. We notify everybody. We spend weeks or a month saying this change is going to occur, and it's supposed to be completely transparent. And then we roll it out, and everybody's happy. But then about, I don't know, maybe a week later, we've got a production system that suddenly goes offline. And they get it, they figured out we get it back. I don't think it was terribly visible outside of, the organization and the company. But what that teaches is that even when you follow all the process, all the protocols done, all the change controls done, everybody signs off, there will still be systems in a mature organization built over years or decades that somebody just isn't paying attention to anymore and doesn't realize that there's a configuration that's at risk to a change. And so, as you get it, what that really, taught is, one, the best laid plans, sometimes don't always work out. But in today's verbiage, in today's parlance, it really needs to be about managing the blast radius, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's change control, whether it's rolling new upgrades. You have to control, like, what is the potential impact, because there's always going to be something that is not considered or unpredictable. I mean, that's just IT today. There's a lot of inputs. You can't account for everything. So the control in there is, really let's make sure that, the potential zone of impact across a wide range of IT problems is correctly managed.
Good advice.
So
that you had to learn the hard way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny coming in and they're like, this happened. And I was like, oh, well, splendid.
Yes. Yes. Have some fun. But not the worst story we've had on here, which is good.
No, probably not the worst story.
Definitely one that's educational. Hey, well, we'll wrap here coming up. I loved hearing everything. And again, plug. It'd be great to see you and Suresh at Accelerate, and for folks to go check out the community edition. They can access that through Pure One. Yes, is that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
and we're actually putting a lot of great tools into Pure One. So you log in. You do have to have a Pure One account.
Yes.
So if you don't have one, reach out to Pure. Reach
talk
out
to
to
an
your
SE.
sales team.
An SE can get you lined up.
We'll get you lined up in there.
Yep.
But you really just go to the Pure One catalog.
Okay.
There's a Pure Protect tab, says Community Edition, and you just go request it in there. It's super easy. You pretty much just click a couple buttons and you get the request in. And then as you're getting ready, we've added a lot of things into the assessment tools in there that help you understand what's the potential sizing going to look like. Like there's qualification for AWS, like will my VM run in AWS native? Or how much network bandwidth do I need between sites and things like that. So there's a lot of great tools that help you kind of understand your environment in there. And then you request the community edition, and we get that processed, and then we'll send you some supporting documentation and get you going.
Yeah, and they've got you to call upon if help is needed.
Absolutely. Hopefully over time more than just me. But
yes, I know. We'll grow it. Well, and the other cyber FSAs can
absolutely. There's an army of people here Pure ready to help you,
which is really great. Awesome. Hey,
great.
thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
super fun. We finally did it.
I know it's been way
Right?
too
'Cause
long.
every time you come to campus, I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't know ahead of time, and you come here quite frequently.
I need to
for
warn you
EBCs
farther
and
ahead.
things. No, that's fine. Let's do your accelerate things, and then maybe do a little check-in in the second half of the year just to see how things have evolved, because I know there's some exciting things going on in the second half as well.
Yeah, we've got exciting plans for Everpure Resilience.
I love it.
I'm looking forward to it.
I love it. That is fantastic. Thank you, Chad, so much for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Quick note, not that she watches, but a quick congratulations to my sister. My parents watch, so they'll like seeing this. A quick congratulations to my sister, who earlier this week I went down to her retirement celebration. 26-year junior high school teacher.
Oh, awesome.
And,
Congratulations
is
to her.
now retiring. So I wanted to mention that. Had a really nice celebration. She did it her way. She did it at a brewery in Anaheim, and had all of her teacher friends out there, and it was super fun. It was a blast. So congrats to her in retirement, and now finding a way to spend a lot more time that's available in the day. Someday you and I will be there as well. So
One day.
One day. A quick mention.
Our retirement plans might not be as nice as 26 years, but
yes,
we'll see.
We'll have to see. But
congratulations to her. 26 years impact is impressive.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you think. Helping kids for that long is just great.
Teachers
Good for her.
are special people. Absolutely, for
I
sure.
still remember most all my teachers' names.
Yeah.
Even in school.
I know, and these will remember her as well. They're kids. So congrats to that. Thanks, Chad, again for coming on. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Pure Report podcast. As always, tell a friend, share with a colleague. Go ahead and do that. And we will keep the great guests like Chad coming on to the program. With that, we will wrap for Everpure and Chad Monteith. This is Rob Ludeman saying, don't look back. Something might be gaining on you.